I couldn't agree more, and we'll definitely have to talk more about coordinating our efforts with yours to help achieve those millions of people with that petition, because clearly the central element of success is going to be focusing on educating the public about this, and labeling is an important component of that. It's always been our belief, and we've worked with Jeffrey Smith and Ronnie Cummins from the Organic Consumers Association in efforts to really achieve that purpose, and it seems like a winnable goal. I mean, in the near future, I think if we all coordinate our efforts, I think within the next few years we could claim victory like they did in Europe, where they voted with their pocketbooks. I don't even believe they were. I believe that they were successful without labeling over there. It was just
No, they had labeling. They had labeling from the beginning.
They did have it from the beginning.
Their governments were much more enlightened than ours and said, listen, this is a new technology coming into our food, and it has to be labeled because people should know that there's novel DNA, in their food. And I let me just second, Jeff Smith does an excellent job. Jeffrey Smith does an excellent job. People haven't read Genetic Roulette. He does an excellent job of summarizing the various health effects. CFS, we were able to, through litigation, get the early FDA studies on GMOs where they said we need to study the toxicity of these foods because it could make a non-toxic food toxic by this novel DNA. It's going to lower nutrition, as I said, cause allergies, and Jeffrey's really followed that up, and his Genetic Roulette's an excellent book, and Organic Consumers Association also does an excellent job. So you've been and your audience has been listening to some very good people, on this. But people shouldn't be discouraged. We have, again, think about this. In the last 7 years, we have halted the introduction of genetically engineered wheat, genetically engineered rice, these biopharmaceuticals, they were genetically engineered, pig vaccine into corn and various other pharmaceuticals to try and use our crops as pharmaceutical devices, right? We're back in court right now, but we stopped for 5 years alfalfa, and recently we stopped sugar beets, genetically engineered sugar beets, which we're back in court on as well. Imagine out there, and by the way, at least temporarily, or at least for the last 10 years, we've stopped genetically engineered salmon. Again, that's we don't know what's going on with that. That could change. But imagine if all your wheat products out there had genetically engineered elements right now. All of your breads and your pastas and you name it, anything with wheat in it was genetically engineered, and rice. And imagine that these biopharmaceuticals were growing around the country. Imagine our dairy, with genetically engineered alfalfa contaminating all of the Roundup Ready contaminating all of the organic dairy out there. So, there's been a lot of victories achieved both legally and achieved through a large coalition of people already acting on this. So we have shown Monsanto, and we have shown DuPont, and we have shown these other Bayer that we can fight back and we can win. And we have won. So, there's no reason to be, sometimes people come up to me and they act like, oh, it's all over. I said, no, it's not all over. They have 4 crops: corn, soy, cotton, and canola, and now some sugar beets. That's all they really have. We've stopped them everywhere else. By we, I mean the whole, allied groups of the United States. And so, we should be encouraged that we can do it. Yeah, the government hasn't helped. Certainly, the legislatures haven't helped, but through a combination of market pressure and legal pressure. And I think if enough people get together and demand labeling, they can do it. Labeling is something the FDA can order tomorrow if they want. Mm-hmm. They can. The statute says, they're the law they work under. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act allows them to label any of this material on and tell the consumer. They just don't want to do it. But if enough of us get together, I think that we can even force labeling. And when we do that, I think the battle is won.
Yeah. Well, what is your best estimate, since you're really into this knee deep, as to the likelihood of success and the timing on it? Because I think ultimately we will be successful. Is when.
Yeah, well, there's 2 reasons we're going to be successful. I've already mentioned one, which is they simply have misunderstood for a very long time the complexity of living systems. They thought it was going to be like a computer. You can slip in, different software into your hard drive, and they thought that's how heredity and traits worked in plants. Well, they were wrong. And so that's why all the things they were looking at, better taste, longer shelf life, drought resistance, you name it. That's why none of that's worked in 30 years. So the science is against them. They were able to pull off these 2 tricks with bacteria genes, the BT, and most importantly, the herbicide tolerance. So they have a very limited universe of products that they can actually put out. So that's one thing that's going to limit them. And I think the second thing is that they haven't provided any benefit whatsoever to the public. And as soon as the public really understands it's no benefit, just risk, then I think that education, I mean, it's just, if we can't defeat a technology that's been put into our food that offers us no benefits, I mean, zero, nil, nada benefits, and a huge bunch of risks, not just to us, but to the environment and everything else, then we're not doing the job we should be doing. If they had some benefits like low fat or better tasting, you name it, then it's a little tougher. But when they offer no benefits except, advertising this, that they're going to feed Africa, which of course they're not, and they haven't increased yield one iota, but as far as the average public is, zero benefits. We should win that battle, and I think we will win that battle.
Well, you've been pretty successful, as you've highlighted before, with your organizations and the others that you're working with and holding them off to date. In many ways, to me, it seems like a David versus Goliath. Monsanto specifically is a multi-billion-dollar corp, if not more than tens of billions, I would think. And you would know better. And they've got loads of legal resources at their disposal, including a former vice president or at least a former legal counsel who is now one of the justices on the Supreme Court. So they have enormous influence and resources, and I'm wondering how you're able to combat that, because it would seem almost insurmountable, but the fact that it wasn't or isn't is certainly encouraging. And so I'm wondering, how you are able to make those types of legal defenses litigation. I guess you're a plaintiff. It's not a defense.
Yeah, we're plaintiffs, and we also, we bring these lawsuits usually on behalf of farmers and various food or environmental organizations, but almost always farmers who are being contaminated. I mean, the problem is that as your audience, I'm sure, knows, that genetic engineering is a prohibited method under organic. So an organic farmer who's contaminated faces the potential loss of all of their certification and all of their contracts. Additionally, Europe, Japan, a number of other countries around the world do not accept certain GMO crops. So our farmers have lost $12 billion since 1997 in lost exports.
Wow.
Because of contamination, $12 billion. Most recently, a very small a very small research plot in in the South somehow, and the USDA does not know how, contaminated a wide swath of rice, conventional rice in the South, with a GMO variant illegal in Europe. And that alone has cost those farmers $1 billion in exports. They filed lawsuits against Bayer, which is the company involved there. And so, these contaminations is a very serious issue. Farmers should have the right to choose. Farmers should be able to say, I'm growing organic, or I'm growing conventional for the non-GMO conventional for the foreign markets. Those farmers should have the right to choose and do that without constant fear of contamination, losing their contracts, losing their livelihoods, and potentially losing their farms. The fact that there's a new technology out there that our government has allowed out there that threatens them every day of the week is really outrageous, and it really shows you the power that Monsanto has. And I'm not going to kid you or the audience here. When you fight Monsanto, believe me, and these other companies, it is David and Goliath, absolutely. Which is why I think we've been very fortunate to win, and we have and the people and the great activists you mentioned, Ronnie, and you mentioned Jeff Smith, but there's also Consumers Union has done a great job on this, and Union of Concerned Scientists have really been staunch in this work. A number of organic companies, I'm thinking of Organic Valley and Stonyfield and some others, have recently really come around and really worked hard on this. And Whole Foods a little bit too. So there are allies. But we need to do a lot better, and that's certainly why I want to be on this show and others and work with people such as yourself, because we're all going to if we're going to defeat these guys, we're going to have to do it all of us together, because they are so powerful and they are so large. And I think that certainly the demand for labeling is one key element in this struggle.
Well, it's great news. I was actually under a bit of misinformation, because one of the first videos I watched on this, I think you were in the video, was an exposition of Monsanto and really describing some of their initial efforts up in Canada, where they were able to successfully sue a farmer up there. I think his first name was Percy, and for basically stealing their intellectual property, because they contaminated his crops. and I think it went all the way to the Canadian Supreme Court, and you would know better. But he lost, and it was my understanding that this was somehow they were able to manipulate and change the law or distort the law in some way to their advantage to have this incredible perversion of justice.
Yeah, that was the Percy Schmeiser case. Percy is a good friend, as is Louise, his wife. They're great. They're canola farmers in Canada, and Percy's been working on that farm for decades, and he's a great guy, very powerful speaker, a real visionary, and he never used Roundup. It was undisputed that he did not use Roundup, and therefore would have had no reason whatsoever to purchase these seeds that contaminated his farm. I was at the Supreme Court hearing. We were Center for Food Safety was an amicus, a friend of the court up there. Absolutely freezing day up in Ottawa, like many degrees below zero. So I never forget that. And in a 5-4 decision, the Canadian Supreme Court held that even though they don't allow the patenting of plants in Canada, we do, but they don't. They said that the patent kind of follows the new genetic material. And so they said that even though he hadn't bought it, he had violated it. However, a part of that decision that most people don't know is that the court also said because it gave no value added to his crop. In other words, Percy, when he sold his crop, he didn't make any more money because it was contaminated. That he did not owe any money to Monsanto. Monsanto had no right to his crop because there was no value added. So, in one way, they unfortunately, and very unfortunately, said, listen, even if you're contaminated, it's a patent violation. And that's a terrible decision. We argued heavily against it in that court. But they also said, the company doesn't have a cause of action unless they've added value to your crop. Well, GMOs almost never add value to a crop. So they took away any incentive for the companies to continue to sue farmers in Canada, because there was no punitive damage allowed in Canada. So they kind of took away, it was kind of Solomonic, they cut it in the middle. They said, okay, you got Monsanto, we'll say your patent applies, but farmers, don't worry because it'll never add value to your crop, so you won't be sued. As in, one thing I will say genetically modified crops have done is increase the value of non-GMO crops. Farmers who are doing non-GMO, it has done that. That is the one thing I'll admit it has done. People say, well, it's done anything? I'll say, yeah. It has definitely increased this, and bovine growth hormone, and the fear of it, and the legitimate fear of it. So, it literally created a massive market in the United States for organic and non-hormone milk and dairy products. It really has been, Monsanto did a huge favor to the organic and the dairy community that they now can say no BGH, no hormones, because people literally, the demand was unbelievable. Now the supply is beginning to catch up with the demand, but for a long time we couldn't get enough organic milk and dairy products to people, and it was a huge amount of that was because of the legitimate fear of bovine growth hormone. So they do some good things unintentionally.
Yeah, absolutely.